call the hearing to order. With that, it is authorized to declare. I want to noon for our committee's second official remote hearing. I want to make sure to note some important requirements. Let me begin. And those committee rules will continue by to hear the rules of the meeting and House. All minded that the committee in technology we are using today requires us to make some small modifications to ensure that the members can fully participate in these proceedings. During the call, the speaker will in accordance with Resolution 965 the item the rules committee in a manner that respects the rights of all members to participate. House regulations require members to be visible through the meeting. So you remember also if you have to participate in another city, please one and log back in later. In the event a member encounters technical issues that prevent them from being recognized for their question, I will move to the member of the same party and will recognize that member at the next appropriate time slot, provided they have returned to the proceeding. The members might be interrupted by technical issues. I will recognize the member at the next appropriate spot for the remainder of their time once their issues have been resolved. In the event the witness loses connectivity, testimony or questioning will serve time as that address the technical issue. I may need to recess the proceedings to provide time for the witness to reconnect. And finally, remember to remain muted until you are recognized to minimize background noise. In accordance with the rules established under House Resolution 965 has been advised to participants only there is inadvertent background noise. Should members to be recognized, they omit themselves recognition at the appropriate time. Before we get started, I wanted to offer a welcome to our newest member, Representative Waisi Mfume from Maryland. Mr. Mfume represented Maryland's 7th Congressional District for 5 terms, beginning in 1987, before leaving office in 1996 to the critical role of heading the Baltimore NAACP. Being a member of the Small Business Committee is new. He previously sat on the committee and served as the of the then Minority Enterprise and Urban Development. I look forward to continuing our work to elevate the needs of small businesses across the city. Welcome, Mr. Mfume, and we are pleased to have you join us. Over a few months, the outbreak of COVID-19 led to an unprecedented public health crisis. Congress took steps to address both, but they focusing on the Paycheck Protection Program. The Paycheck Protection Program is a sub-program of the 7A guarantee and began with almost $300 billion of food guarantee for people loans designed to meet the role of expenses. The program is safe as business job as possible, as quickly as possible. To do so, they stood up the program with and guaranteed time any loans and entire 20 fiscal year. All this in just few short weeks. We appreciate all hard by everyone today and are grateful to the leading partners who participate in helping business stay afloat during these uncertain times. However, given such hope, the speed with which was put up was found to be less than perfect. As a member of the Small Business Committee, we facilitated areas for improvements in all of AIA programs. And the first round of Paycheck Protection funding exposed some of those areas. For example, too many Main Street mom shops were forced to the sidelines as the program was first rolled out, with larger, better capitalized businesses receiving those loans. All were left with the hope that Congress would add more money to the program. Eventually, Congress did. And on April 24th, the Paycheck Protection Program to provide an additional $310 billion in Paycheck Protection Program funding. Important, the additional funding included a set aside of $6 million for small and unions, as well as CD5, CDIs, SBA on the media of integration PPP funds to underserved to access. This second round has not turned out as the first, in part, I suspect, because of the lack of guidance with the first round of the program. Agency rules forced to act again, and on June, Paycheck Protection Flexibility Act was signed into law. The Flexibility Act extends the period from 8 weeks to 24 weeks up until December 30th. It also permitted borrowers to spend a great portion of their loan on payroll costs and repayable payments. Timely, as we will be able to hear from stakeholders what is worked with them, what hasn't worked, how Congress is optimizing the program, our local economy slowly begin to reopen. There were also no regulatory decisions made by SBA and Treasury in the early weeks of the program that may have limited the appeal of the loans to some prospective borrowers. For example, the agencies added a resource test to the program and established a rule that required borrowers to spend 70% of on payroll costs in order to be eligible for full forgiveness. To restrict the ability many difficult small businesses to spend the funds needed and make PPP product less appealing for borrowers. As program enters the phase, the east boundary are easy. My concern is the loan gifts application, which according to experts is more like a tax application. Before this is the feature of the program to be as easy as possible. We also heard my own businesses and social actors continue to struggle with accessing PPP loans despite about $130 billion remaining in the program. And just last week, Secretary Mnuchin testified for our Senate counterpart. Treasury will not be publishing detailed loan information for PPP, giving Congress and the public data need to evaluate the program. So I look forward hearing from distinguished panelists today about how Congress can keep improving the Paycheck Protection Program. Congress should consider their success for the second round of PPP funding expires the program closes on June 30th. Again, I want to thank panelists for joining us here today, and I now yield to the ranking member about this open statement.
Chair, thank you for holding. And I also to extend our to Mr. Mfume. I was elected in 1994, left in 1996, so I have the current serving term with him. His former chair is our wall in the room, so we want to welcome him back to the committee. I'm sure be a contribution to small businesses all over the country. On a different once again, Mr. concern on behalf of our side about continuing conducting meetings by virtual format. Also, important work that needs to be complete yet to have these hearings virtually with dates and locality open up. It's a concern that the House of Representatives remains a virtual entity. I certainly don't hold chair responsible for this. It's obviously a perfect grade, as I said. I believe Speaker and the deputy should make sure that Congress is in session, because we have a lot of work to do. I'm actually in Washington right now in the Capitol Visitor Center, because that's where we're holding a hearing relative to the George Floyd killing, and Congress's response to that. There's obviously a number of legislation, the Senate has legislation, the administration for their suggestions as how we move forward. An executive order yesterday. So we're discussing this here, and unfortunately, other than that, committees are not in session in reality. Now, relative to today's hearing, Paycheck Protection Program application portal opened on April 3rd. It hasn't been that long. In just 2 months, the EA approved and dispersed more than 4.5 million loans, totaling over $500 billion. It's a Herculean effort by the SBA, which is a relatively smaller agency, which is really extremely hard, and it's incredible. They've done. Of course, they have more to do. According to the May employment report released by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, non-farm employment rose by 2.5 million, so that's good news. And the unemployment rate climbed to 13.3%. Good news that when it's unfortunate that it's still that high. We obviously have a lot of work to get that unemployment rate get our economy moving again. A long way to go in this recovery, but it appears PPP is having a big impact on saving American jobs. I've seen the impact of these loans in my district back in Southwest Ohio, where I did nearly 2 dozen businesses now that have utilized the PPP loan, like restaurants and learning centers and manufacturers and medical practices. And for example, on May 8th, I had the honor and pleasure of being an animal hospital in Lebanon, Ohio, and I had and the rich woman, if he shares his experience with the PPP program, and he's going to be one of our witnesses today, and certainly welcome him to be introduced shortly. We know the program has been perfect, especially early on. Congress made adjustments, including the Paycheck Protection Program Enhancement Act, and then the Flexibility Act, and these adjustments included expand the forgiveness of 23 weeks, the option of the small business to determine is in their best interest. That option can one or the other. That help a lot of people. All modifying the amount must be pay costs from the 25, 45, 40 I heard from a lot of that's going to and other things that we did. The PPP program is a result of tireless work in Congress and the administration. We hope to a delicate balance between accessibility for lenders and loan recipients, integrity of the program, and needed stuff. This paper continues to be a hallmark of federal programs without compromising confidential information and personal information. That's very important. Additionally, small businesses close to the period will be from Congress to examine how forgiveness is needed. Today's session will add to the settlement of the we're committed to ensure this program can maximum impact for small businesses all across the country. And I want to thank all today and countless businesses that provide feedback and to other members of Congress, especially those on this about how the PP programs work with their impact will have immediate impact on the program, the nation's economic activity. I want to thank you for bringing it.
Thank you, Mr. Chabot. I would like to take a moment to explain how this hearing will proceed. With the five statement, and each committee member will have 5 minutes for questions. Please ensure that your microphone is on when you begin speaking and that you return to mute when finished. With that, we would like to thank witnesses for taking time out of their busy schedule to join us. Our first witness is Olivia Kelly, Secretary and Proprietor of IMO, a seasonal farm to restaurant in Brooklyn. After 13 career in successful, she opened this restaurant in 2000 with the help of SBA loan. Since then, she has partnered with W. Mario, opened 2 additional locations, and has been for excellence by numerous industry organizations. However, the outbreak of COVID put the restaurant she out PPP loan will save business. Kelly, thank you for joining today. Our second witness is Mr. Eduardo. He is the Senior Vice President of Commerce National Bank, an independent community bank in Texas area with about $5 billion in assets. The bank is the 7A preferred all use of experience program. His insight will therefore be helpful for the committee as we evaluate the case of the PDD. Mr. Oza, thank you for joining us today. Our third witness is Ashley Harrington, the Director of Federal Advocacy and Senior Counsel at the Center for Responsible Lending, a leadership and advocacy organization dedicated to the financial services market that provides meaningful opportunities for community asset and economic growth. Ms. Harrington, thank you for joining us. Finally, I would like to turn it over to the ranking member, Mr. Shepard, to introduce our last witness.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our final witness today is Dr. Rich Coleman, owner of Four Paws and Hospital in Lebanon, Ohio. Dr. Rich completed his undergraduate studies at the University of Cincinnati before graduating from the Ohio State University of Medicine in 2002. In 2006, Pulmonary Clinic changed the name to Four Paws Animal Hospital in 2007, the facility in 2012, and a remodel in March of 2009. To allow for growth and opportunities for his clientele. Obviously, none of it anticipated at that time what was coming down the pike, so I'm sure it would be interesting to hear how that's a community servant and sponsor many local programs in Warren County. His wife, Jen, is a teacher at Lebanon City Schools, and when I visited, I had an opportunity to speak with her about what was going on in the school system up there at the time. Delightful to meet his two wife daughters, and their two hats and two black legs, although I don't think I met all those today. My staff and I visited Paws Animal Hospital last month. They benefited from the PPE and many other businesses. I want to thank you, Doctor, for having us at your great animal care facility, for joining us here today. Look forward to your testimony, as I do all the other witnesses as well. And I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Shabbat, and thank you all for being here. I would now like to begin by recognizing Ms. Kelly for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank Chairwoman Velasquez, Ranking Member Shabbat, as well as members of this opportunity to represent and address concerns of the hospitality. Chef Melissa Kelly, owner of Primo Restaurant in Maine. I'm here in the kitchen alone. In normal times, this kitchen would be filled with my staff busy preparing for dinner service. The corona pandemic has changed all of that. Today, I'd like to share my thoughts and concerns in 3 areas: the people that work with, the industry, and the effectiveness of the PPP loan system. I am a chef. I believe I do what I do is help people eat healthy, delicious food that gives them nourishment joy. I believe that to bring them is all part of my responsibility. I own a small farm. I run in Coast Maine, and this is where my we operate on a single account, open for now, closed for 3. This April was the beginning of my 21st season. Through hard work and dedication, business has grown slowly over the years, and now I employ farmers, washers, hosts, and office. The governor of Maine lockdown, we were my first people enough money to see them through all period. But I didn't have any idea how long I would need to take for it. I did not want to let them off. That I have involved is our age. I have lived in Northeast twice, and my team is a big the reason why. My restaurant eats 105 diners inside. Normally serve over 32,000 meals a season. My staff have an average earning of 6 hours. Our revenue is between July and October. I am here today not only to represent myself, but also as a spokesperson for the restaurant industry in general. I operate in Maine, but especially depend on revenue seasonal workers. Many of my fellow restaurateurs are not going to make this. They're not about the government and the restrictions on restaurants due to COVID-19. Regardless of who opens in the industry, patrons still have hesitance or face financial stresses in their own, which will take us time to recover. Pray for us all. The PPP was first offered. I thought long and hard about applying for it. On eligibility period, calculating the TE count payroll that I of course use basically with a very reduced operation. For example, my TE count is 24. Normally, when I have DTE, I was also concerned with what spend could be covered. There have been many added costs related to COVID-19, PPE, training. I'm building an area. Be reimbursed. On my PPP, $180,000 on 17th of April. At the time of the closing, I was supposed to spend all of the money. Given the 8-week time frame, I was extremely concerned about being allowable to take the loan, get less and need more debt. Most of the period of the loan, restaurant has been closed, dine-in operations. We use the loan funds to bring back staff to take it. Revenue from takeout has been less than 20% of what we normally focus on no operations. Major T issued a new ruling allows season to use an alternative option-based period to calculate the maximum loan amount. With calculations, I was eligible for up to $513,000, but I had only to June 30th to utilize funds. The rest was still closed for dine-in state board. As such, a been a poor decision to obtain additional funds certainly happened. The reason of the Paycheck Protection and Flexibility Act is a positive step in the right direction to provide necessary flexibility and assistance to businesses that are during this pandemic. Upon passage, I applied to increase my loan to support operations as we continue to face significantly reduced revenue. Unfortunately, I was notified that because my local bank had filed the SBA Form 2 on May 18th, the loan could not be increased due to SBA rules. Given all of this and the ongoing future challenges faced by the hospitality, I'm recommending change the SBA rules regarding the loan after 1402 session increase PPP loan businesses.
Ms. Kelly, Ms. Kelly, your desired question and answers period. And we recognize, so thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. As a former farm worker who has spent 5 years as an SBA lender, I'm especially honored to be here. Senior Vice President of Commerce National Bank in Austin, Texas, I helped to oversee the PPP, making approximately $3,500 loans, total of $470 million for over 7,000 employees. For Congress, quick action to the problem of employed Americans and unemployed Congress, agencies felt pressure to produce statute and guidelines as fast as possible and to let's implement the program immediately. But the person paying the price for speed and to look at the program balance with sense. Let me explain. First, PP guidance includes 19 internal rules and 48 FAQs with free change. I'm an experienced lender, but I never fully understood how to make a PP from the beginning to what it does. For guidance issues in the program after millions of hours and contracts, less hours signed other conditions. We still don't know how eligibility and forgiveness decisions will be made. We need clear, complete guidance. Next, the execution. Congress allowed loans up to $10 million, broadened standards, relaxed affiliation rules, and limited the traditional 7A Delaware test. We believe Congress that most businesses would be able to certify to the necessity of a loan. All never said the business needed to first use available capital, and need remains undefined. But as the media and hiding negative story attitude shift, and our FA and followers now require the borrower self-assessment based on the eliminated credit sources. I've watched my customers fearfully repay loans. My bank's $477 million in loans, $30 million were repaid because contradictory guidance and received. The saddest part is the majority of the loans repaid were the smallest, as low as $1,400. Imagine a borrower's fear when the government says it must return loan funds for serious consequences. The federal government said we're ahead, and then changed this program to help. Any businesses that invited to participate can require the agency's knowledge that credit elsewhere. And if they use directly statute, see threatening small businesses. Next, forgiveness issue. Lenders know how or where to submit their borrower's forgiveness applications, and borrowers still don't know how to appeal. Guys, we do have is unclear and places a tremendous power, especially those, especially with long need forgiveness. I strongly recommend provide statutory to create forgiveness for borrowers with loans of $150,000 or less. Next, liability. The law can rely on borrower documents and certification. Agency use mandate QC can rely on a borrower certification, but a recent IFR says lenders must review borrower calculations and documentation. If forgiveness are not appropriately implemented, they can be denied. Lenders are increasingly worried about participating or constantly changing. Should we be surprised that they're skeptical about a program expansion without complete guidance being provided first? Congress required promptly pay lender processing fees, not only now or starting to get paid. And we're just learning that the agencies will refuse to pay for loans if there is a determination of ineligibility based on new interpretations. That is unfair and unprincipled. Despite these issues, we chose to participate. We might allow a husband and wife on bakery. We were able to keep their 24 employees, but they
Mr.
started
Sosa,
offering eggs.
excuse me, time expired, so you'll be able to expand. Nancy, thank you.
Thank
Ms.
you.
Harrington, now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairwoman Velasquez, Ranking Member Chabot, and members of the committee. My name is Ashley Harrington, and I'm the Federal Advocacy Director and a Senior Counsel at the Center for Responsible Lending. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan research and policy organization working to advance economic opportunity. CRL is an affiliate of Self-Help, one of the nation's largest community development financial institutions, CDFI. A longtime small business administration lender, Self-Help has focused on helping underserved applicants access the Paycheck Protection Program. The PPP is one of the largest taxpayer-funded crisis relief programs in our nation's history. The program's intention is good and was built around an important premise: provide a lifeboat for small business owners so that they and their employees can stay afloat during this pandemic. But the execution and rollout of the PPP fell short, creating a barrier for small business owners of color to access relief. And that's what I hope to underscore for you today. Since the start of the crisis, business owners of color have been especially and unfairly hard hit. Active Black and Latino-owned businesses have declined by 41% and 32% respectively. Asian American-owned business owners dropped by 26%. By comparison, active white business owners declined by 17%. These business owners of color are from the same communities that were the most adversely affected by the Great Recession. And unfortunately, they're the ones most likely to have been underserved by the PPP. This program disadvantages the smallest businesses. Businesses owned by people of color on average have fewer employees than white-owned businesses. CRL's analysis of the latest government study shows that for 95% of Black-owned businesses and 91% of Latino-owned businesses, the owner is the only current employee, as compared with 78% of white-owned businesses. These businesses are the least likely to be served by the PPP. Business owners of color are less likely than white owners to have a relationship with a commercial lender. This puts them at a sharp disadvantage, especially during the first come, first served opening round of PPP, which caused serious fair lending concerns. Businesses of color have historically lacked access to SBA loans and credit generally. A recent study found steep reductions in SBA 7A lending to Black businesses between 2008 and 2016. In 2018 and 2019, only 5% of all SBA 7A loans were made to Black-owned businesses, and only 9% were made to Latino-owned businesses. Business owners of color are more likely than white business owners to feel discouraged from seeking loans. Minority depository institutions, MDIs, and CDFIs are helping to increase PPP access, but have been hindered by unnecessary loan volume thresholds and other difficult requirements. And finally, the SBA's 11-page application for loan forgiveness, which largely tracks the documentation requirements under CARES, is so complex and cumbersome that businesses too small to afford an accountant or lawyer will find it extremely difficult to complete, turning what was supposed to be a grant into long-term debt. This burden, too, will disproportionately fall on business owners of color. And while the easy form released today is an improvement, it still requires extensive documentation. Last month, the SBA Inspector General reported that, despite a requirement in the CARES Act, SBA and the Treasury Department failed to issue guidance to lenders to ensure that they prioritize underserved markets, including rural, minority, and women-owned businesses. As of today, we are yet to see any guidance. The IG also noted that the SBA did not collect standard demographic data on its PPP form. This failure made it unlikely that the SBA could determine whether funds reached underserved markets. Despite the SBA's failure to collect and release data, there is ample evidence that PPP has not equitably served businesses of color. My written testimony provides more detail, along with recommendations to address the problem and fully support business owners of color going forward. As we know, recent people-led protests across our country decry the pain of communities long denied equal access to the most basic aspects of America's promise of justice and equal opportunity. These communities continue to suffer the consequences of federal policy decisions that needlessly and unjustly make economic opportunities harder to access. Right now, under your watch, the public is looking at you to address these inequalities, and they deserve a response. I urge you to seize this moment. CRL and other organizations are ready to help you. It's already too late for many small businesses, and those that remain can't wait any longer. The PPP is set to expire in 2 weeks. If it is not extended and reformed to serve these businesses, many will never recover. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Harrington. And now we recognize Mr. Coleman for 5 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Honorable Congresswomen and Congressmen, I am honored to be here and thank you for allowing me to come before you today as a representative of small businesses across the United States. My wife Jen and I purchased a veterinary practice from another veterinarian and quickly made our own in 2007. At the time of the purchase, the practice was a single doctor practice. We now have expanded to become a 5-doctor practice with 34 employees. In 2012, we moved from a strip mall store to our own state-of-the-art 5,400 square foot standalone building in the heart of the Lebanon business corridor. Over the past few years, we've seen an amazing level of growth from client standpoint as well as revenue standpoint. Over the past few years of prosperity, we've been able to give raises, purchase equipment, and add additional staff members. In March, all that changed. COVID-19 hit the United States and people were asked to stay home. Ohio was one of the earliest to shut down. Fortunately for us, we were deemed an essential business, and we were still able to operate as a veterinary hospital, but with severe restrictions in place. Because of these restrictions, we went from monthly continuous growth numbers to being down 30% or more. We were fearful that at any time we would have to shut down the hospital if one of the staff members fell ill from coronavirus. We first heard about the PPP loans on the national news. I immediately reached out to our local bank to start the wheels in motion. I stayed in contact with them and asked for any information they were getting as far as the loan application and what it would look like. I filled out sample applications, had my numbers confirmed by my accountant, and tried to get any documentation that was needed for when the loans would be approved by Congress, the SBA, and the President. Once the bank let me know that the applications were ready, I filled them out, submitted them everything the next day, and the bank kept me in the loop where we stood with the application process, and the approval process occurred. And quickly we signed documents, and within a week, our PPP was funded. I cannot say enough about the way the Congress and the SBA got such a huge undertaking done so quickly. The funds were exactly what our business needed to make up the shortfall in revenue, allow us to keep all of our employees. We did not lay off any of the staff, and everyone was able to keep their hours, even if, especially if they were able to come to work. A few staff members had to stay home for 2-week quarantines due to unknown nature of things in the early stages. We asked anyone with a fever or cough to stay home for those 14 days, but no one in the hospital tested positive for COVID-19, and everyone was able to return to work. The only concern that we had with the loan process was the loan documents that we signed did not have language in them to discuss the loan forgiveness. We were signing a loan with good faith that the government would honor their word and forgive the PPP loan. I looked at the loan as a lifeboat that my business needed and to provide for my staff and my family. If the loan was forgiven, it would be a godsend. If the loan was not, then I at least had a government loan with a reasonable term that helped me get through this unusual time. The loan was funded during the first phase, and we received $206,000. I saw an interesting statistic that during the first phase, the average loan was $206,000. So I joked with my wife that we own the most average business in the United States. Our 8-week loan period actually ends on June 17 today. We have elected to extend to the 24 weeks as allowed by the new provisions passed two weeks ago. We opened an account that was only to be used for the PPP loan funds. That way there was complete transparency with every dollar that was used. Our business has rebounded and we're digging out. We are still not practicing veterinary medicine the way I have the last 18 years, but we are currently doing car calls with clients staying in the hospital and only the pets coming in. It is a new business model, and my staff has been amazing in completely reinventing ourselves. I cannot thank them enough for getting our veterinary hospital and all of our patients and clients through these tough times. In conclusion, again, I cannot thank Congress enough for providing the funds that all small businesses in the U.S. needed to survive this time of uncertainty. I feel that the loan process could not have gone any smoother than it did. Congress is known for doing things at glacial speed, and I was amazed at how quickly this came together. It was amazing that what an accomplishment can happen when we all work together. I would like to thank our local community bank, Lebanon Citizens National Bank, for making the process as easy as possible under the circumstances. My accountant, Pelfrey and Associates, for helping navigate through the application process. Thank you again for having me today and allowing me to tell my story. Because of the bipartisan efforts of Congress, the 34 staff members at Four Paws Animal Hospital were able to go home every night knowing that they could pay their rent, feed their family, and more importantly, feed the massive amount of pets that they own. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman. And I will begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Harrington, just last week, Secretary Mnuchin announced that no PPP loan data will be published. As we both know, this is in contradiction with conventional 7A practices, under which individual loan data is publicly accessible on the SBA website. Can you expound on the issue of the lack of PPP loan data reporting and how it will impede the ability of Congress and the public to track the demographic breakdown of PPP access?
Absolutely. Thank you, Congresswoman. It's definitely a big issue and departs from everything SBA has done previously and all of the reporting it does for the 7A program. The demographic information is so important to know where these funds are going and which communities are being served. We have already heard about all of the communities, the businesses owned by people of color who are struggling and who have not had access to these programs, who have gone to institutions and been denied or never heard anything about their application, and they are struggling. So without this information from the SBA itself, we cannot hold the SBA accountable for this $660 billion taxpayer investment.
Thank you. Mr. Sosa, does the lending community have similar concerns with data reporting?
The regular 7A program, you are correct. As far as I know, all of the information there is public information. There might be some considerations as to some proprietary information on the PPP loan, but I don't want to get into any kind of political thing here because I'm not a politician. I support publicly available information for oversight. If somebody is not playing by the rules, they need to answer for that lack of rules.
Thank you. Ms. Kelly, how many of your employees have you been able to retain? And do you think you will be able to keep rehiring as your local economy slowly begins to reopen?
I've been able to retain 16 employees at this moment. We have not opened the restaurant for indoor dining as of yet. Like I stated earlier, I am building an outdoor area because the state of Maine allows 50 guests inside and 50 outside. I intend to open inside slowly soon with caution. And as soon as we get the outside area open, I will bring back more employees, absolutely.
Ms. Harrington, surveys have shown that COVID-19 pandemic has disproportionately affected micro businesses and sole proprietors. In your view, what more needs to be done to ensure the PPP and other small business programs are assisting the smallest of small businesses?
We need to ensure that the remaining funds in the PPP program are getting to these really small businesses and the businesses who have not yet been served. There's over $100 billion left that's set to expire. The program needs to be extended, but also reformed, providing for things like a minimum origination fee, set asides for CDFIs and MDIs. All of these things will help ensure that funding gets to the really small businesses and the businesses owned by people of color who have yet to be served by this program.
So at minimum, we should expect for the administration to provide data as to the demographics, similar to what any 7(a) lender or borrower has to provide when they apply for those loans. That is the only way that we could determine whether or not the smallest of the small businesses have been able to access the assistance that they need. Should we consider automatic loan forgiveness for the minimum loan amounts, Ms. Harrington?
Absolutely. The forgiveness application as laid out and the process as laid out, even this easy form, is incredibly burdensome for the really small businesses. We advocate for streamlined automatic forgiveness for loans under 100K, and this will disproportionately serve the really small businesses. On average, these are businesses that will likely have 13 or fewer employees, the businesses that we really want to be able to survive and make it through this crisis.
Thank you, Ms. Harrington. My time has now expired. The ranking member, Mr. Chabot, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Dr. Coleman, I'll begin with you. Time and expense, have you estimated that it might take to complete the PPP forgiveness application process?
Well, did you say the time and expense? Well, the key with small businesses is we are not Fortune 500 companies. We don't have accountants on staff. So, a caterer is going to make 400 sandwiches and then go do business. Mechanic may go change out a muffler and then go do their business work. With me, I'm going to go spay the family pet and then come back, and now I have to do all this business work. And sometimes it's at the detriment of my family time. The key here is we have to outsource all of those things. So streamlining it for these small businesses would be great. And it sounds like the SBA started that today with the easy form. I had this 11-page document right here from what it was before. And, I showed it to my wife last night, and it was like a tax form. I'm not going to lie to you. I missed a few of the words in there. I didn't know what they meant. And so I was concerned that this was going to be a massive undertaking and be something that would require me just going to the accountant and having the accountant do the entire work for me. Yeah.
Let's see, I'll go to Mr. Souza next. Considering the kind of piecemeal issuing of guidance and FAQs, frequently asked questions, and the IFRs, interim financial rules, would some form of comprehensive program guide have been more, or would it be more helpful to lenders and recipients, in your opinion? Mr. Souza? I think you're not muted. I think you're muted.
You need to unmute.
Thank you. I think that would be incredibly helpful. We are a PPP lender under Amarillo National Bank, our ownership group. And under that program, we have standard operating procedures that give us the guidelines for that. You will, in my opinion, you would find that you would have lenders participating in greater numbers and borrowers particularly less concerned and less scared by having definite guidelines of what rules they can follow, not only for the application, but as well, particularly for the forgiveness process. That is an onerous process. Forgiveness, even under the simplified applications that were issued this morning, they're still quite onerous as far as documentation is concerned. I think a standard automatic forgiveness at 150,000 would be called for.
Thank you very much. Ms. Kelly, I'll go to you next. Are there issues that you think that Congress should address as we consider policies for the long-term economic recovery that we're going to be working towards?
I want to stress the need to revise and amend the PPP, like maybe call it a PPP 2.0 to provide additional funding to support restaurants and hospitality businesses in the weeks and months ahead as we are still dealing with the impact of the virus. I tried to give you a brief description today about my experience as a small business owner in Maine. I'm very grateful to the committee for all of the bipartisan work that you have done and continue to do. But I want you all to think about restaurants in a different way. After 30 years being in the business, our industry is in a crisis. Without additional support, we'll lose the important sector and the dynamic contributions that we have in our local communities. Our fray goes far and wide. All of the local businesses that we support, and we are in a crisis.
I think for about one more question. I've got a lot of them, but one more. Ms. Harrington, I'll go to you now. As Congress examines the approximately $130 billion that we still have remaining in the PPP program, where should we concentrate our efforts, in your opinion, to produce the most impact for small businesses?
They should concentrate on ensuring that these funds get to the really small businesses with 10 or fewer employees, that they're getting to businesses located in LMI census tracts, that they are working with lenders who traditionally serve services like CDFs and DDS. And also the first step, right, is extending the program to ensure that $130 billion can actually get to the communities who have yet to be served. It's great to hear that it has worked for some. I think the numbers about the non-active donor, 41% of Black businesses and 32% Latino-owned businesses speak for themselves. That changes need to be made to this program.
Thank you very much. My time's expired, Madam Chair, so I yield back.
Thank you. And now we recognize the gentleman from Maine, Mr. Golden, for 5 minutes.
Chair, we're just setting my clock and pulling up my questions. There we go. I wanted to start with Mr. Souza. I appreciate your sharing your experience from the lender perspective, some of the challenges navigating the PPP. And I've heard similar concerns from main lenders and borrowers about the lack of clarity surrounding loan forgiveness and how that complicated their decision making on whether or not to use the PPP. And hopefully, we'll see more people feeling like they have the information they need to come forward and take advantage of that $130 billion that remains. I agree with you, and I think a lot of people do, that lenders and borrowers in Maine give for the smaller owners in particular. We talked a little bit about the 3508 EZ. I wanted to you if you knew any statistics, and I'm sorry you on this. SBA follow you advice and grant autonomous for loans worth $150,000 or less. Roughly what proportion of your PPP clients do you think would benefit from that change?
Thank you for the
You need to
question.
mute.
At Commerce National Bank, fully 83% of our loans were below 150,000. 83% of those, that's 2,868 borrowers would automatically be forgiven. On the national basis, which is really an impact, 86% of the business loans would be forgiven. That is somewhat significant as when you consider that only represents 80% of number of loans. It only represents approximately 27% of the dollars. So there's still room oversight availability on that, on the remaining dollars, just that the bulk of these small businesses, those guys that with a boot on the ground with that 10 employees or less would be forgiven.
Yeah. And I appreciate you pointing out the 10 employees or less. How might you estimate the number of hours per client that might be saved in regards to how they spend their time in their business?
That's a tough math question. Well, geez, if you just go back and you use the 3 hours that SBA estimates, which I sincerely and humbly submitted very low, and then multiply that out times how many. I know that there's 20 million dollars in that category. To multiply those 3 hours, it's that.
That's a lot of work around the country.
It's a lot of work saved. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. A minute and a half. Ms. Kelly, so glad to have you joining people of business in May. I talked to a lot of businesses that share some of the same challenges that you shared. Again, like the next 6 to 12 months, some of the unique challenges that you see lying ahead. Talk more about what Congress and government to help you take the next step towards recovery and.
Okay. Yeah, for me, a lot of the next 6 months are very unknown. We actually were in July when I have my whole team being trained ready for the busiest of my season through October. I've lost all of my business that's in my barn, weddings, and everything's been canceled. We need support. We need to figure out a way. The whole unemployment, extra dollars, and like a little bit of a catch-22 for us because not a lot of employees don't necessarily want to come home back to work. They're making over $1,000 a week just staying home and golfing and things like that. However, I think if there was, I know the work-share program and those are really important and ways that we can have our employees come back, spark the economy, and they're at cost to cancel the level used to, the money they're used to making. And I don't understand how we're going to get past this if y'all
we recognize dental lady from American Samoa, Ms. Ryder Wagner. Yes.
Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay.
Can.
Welcome, good morning, or good afternoon, depending on where you may be. So sorry for all of you. You're all stuck on the continent, and I'm getting to enjoy paradise. But I Chairman Velasquez, Member Chabot for organizing this hearing, and you are testifying. PPP is extremely helpful to people of America, but like many great leaders, work to make it even better. My question here for Ms. Harrington: do you believe small businesses were aware of the resources available within the SBA prior to COVID-19?
Pre-COVID-19, SBA has not served as well. If you look at the 2018 and 2019 for the 7A program, which is the largest SBA program, 1% with business owners, 9% with Latino business owners. I think a lot we can do to support those beyond PPP. I think individual business owner coverage credit through traditional means, even which is a government guaranteed program. And I think recognizing that and looking at the types who have served even before COVID, that's the data it's also important. There are a number of ways to do this, just outsource instead of trusting of accredited that extends to small business owners.
Mr. For the committee, where is beginning of PPP. Mr. Shola?
Yes, I'm here. I had to remember to mute. Actually, limited it also for PPP program. Agency did the credit for by requiring small business to self-certify that they need the money, and then to provide a definition of what need it kind of, and they start sizing small business, and several of my borrowers away had a paid off, went to because he heard the threats from the government. Else said, he came from a country where the government regularly carried out threats and acted on those threats. As an immigrant, he ran and scared from the program. That's unfair. That's not our country. That upset me quite a bit, and I think it's wrong. We all need to remember that words mean something, and not to threaten these poor small business people.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I yield back.
The gentle lady yields back, and now we recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Kim, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for pulling together this very important hearing. This is one of the most important issues that I hear constantly about in my district here in New Jersey. When we're thinking about and talking about reforms to the Paycheck Protection Program and how we're making sure that funds are getting into the hands of those that need it the most, that is really the critical question. And Ms. Harrington, I thought you've really eloquently spoken to just the challenges that are faced, certainly by making sure that we are getting these funds to businesses owned by minority-owned businesses in communities of color and other places where people are in dire need. I've also been hearing from small businesses across some various other industries, like nonprofits, after-school programs, and medical providers that were excluded from the program and are in dire need of aid, and a lot of their work very integral to different aspects of reopening. So I guess, Ms. Harrington, I wanted to ask you, as we're starting to think through upcoming stimulus bills and other additional efforts we can do on the PPP, do you think it'd be beneficial to expand the PPP to other types of businesses like some of the ones that I mentioned?
I think first, I want to just reiterate, it's very important to reform and extend the current PPP just until that funds run out. I think moving forward, we do need to think about programs that are not just loan programs. We need to think about traditional straight up grant programs that would benefit and be targeted to the small businesses and to the businesses that are located in low and middle income communities, low and moderate income communities. There are ways to do that. Also thinking about which agencies we're working with, if it is a loan program, which lenders we are working with. So I think there's a number of ways to do that, but I think you're absolutely right. We need to look at the sectors that haven't been served, the populations that haven't been served, and recognize that maybe the Paycheck Protection Program was helpful for some, but it doesn't work for all businesses. And therefore we have to think about more creative ways moving forward.
About the importance of data and just needing to have that data to first of all understand what sectors are getting hardest hit, and to be able to overlay on top of that when we think some of these different sectors will be able to get back on their feet. As we know, there's asymmetry to that, and some sectors may be able to get back on their feet earlier than others. And I think, Ms. Kelly, I wanted to just turn to you here.
I think we lost
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Mr. Kim.
Getting back open. In particular, when it comes to seasonal issues here, my district is my district is one where seasonal tourism is a huge part of but the economy, especially out on the Jersey Shore. A lot of restaurants, similar situation to you. So I wanted you to, if you could just elaborate a little bit more on the unique challenges that you're facing in terms of the seasonality of your business and the uncertainty of how the next couple weeks and months will look when it comes to opening back up.
Well, we are already in almost the kickoff of the season here in Maine, so it's been very daunting to have to be in this position at this point. I mean, we're living in a historic moment right now where we need to expand. In my opinion, we need to expand the PPP, which may be the survival for small businesses who really depend on a certain window of time for the amount of revenue that they make. I think grants would be beneficial or different loans, but somehow we have to capture this moment or the whole year for us is a wash.
No, thank you for that. I've certainly been hearing from a lot of restaurants owner. I got to go visit a number of them in my district earlier this week as they are starting with outdoor seating today, earlier this week. But we continue to hear the same thing that you're saying, which is, restaurants cannot operate off of 30% capacity or 40% capacity, that the margins are already hard enough at peak levels. So I certainly want to continue to work with you and others to see what we can do to try to get you the help that you need. So with that, I'll yield back to Madam Chair. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back, and now we recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Balderson.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. Thank you for sitting in today, Ms. Kelly and Dr. Coleman. My first question is, a few weeks ago, I joined many of my colleagues, including Mr. Burchett and Mr. Hearn, who also sit alongside me in this committee, in requesting a simplified PPP forgiveness application. In this letter to the SBA and Treasury, as well as the Senate leadership, we've voiced our concerns over the complexity of the 11-page PPP loan forgiveness application and asked a new simplified version be created, much like the IRS relies on the 1040 Easy form for some taxpayers. Just this morning, Treasury and SBA released the 3508 Easy Loan Forgiveness Application, which seeks to ease the forgiveness process for many small businesses. I think this is a step in the right direction. I want to thank the administration for making this update. Ms. Kelly and Dr. Coleman, have either of you had a chance to take a look at this new 3508 Easy Form application?
I apologize. I have not. I was working this morning and came straight from appointments to this. I did get a notice by email from one of my colleagues that had passed this morning by the SBA. And so I have not had a chance to look at it. I'm sure it's less daunting than the 11-page document that we have seen already. But unfortunately, I have not seen it yet. No.
Dr. Coleman, I completely understand. I was on a flight this morning too, so forgive me. Ms. Kelly?
Absolutely, same as Dr. Rich. I was working this morning and I did not have an opportunity to see it. So,
okay. I understand completely. I just wanted to see if you had a chance and opportunity to see it. This is for Dr. Coleman. My next question, Dr. Coleman, thank you. Is it vital that we work to address this health crisis, care crisis? But today we are here to understand the economic impact this had on our nation's small businesses. In your written testimony, you talk about the good faith agreement between small businesses applying for PPP and the federal government because the documents you signed didn't have forgiveness language included. Over the last few weeks, SBA and Treasury have worked together to release the language relevant to PPP forgiveness, as well as the application itself. Have you had an opportunity to go through this new information?
Yes, I have.
And if so, what are some of your thoughts?
As far as the forgiveness, a couple of the big keys that I saw, and I actually made a list of them. The biggest change between the first one and the second one. First one, a lot of the PPP weeks with the payroll was huge. Our biggest issues that we had was we were concerned about once we got funded, are we 8 weeks from that date? Well, in the middle of a payroll cycle, and so we were a little off on schedule. So that was a big one. The flexibility from the 8 weeks to the 24 weeks, we're going to extend to the 24 weeks just because we are actually holding back 5% of our loan just as a precautionary. We don't know where COVID's going to go from here. So we're going to hold that back. The 25 to 40%. We've been open the whole time. So our biggest deduction was from payroll. And so whereas Ms. Kelly may have had more of an issue with paying her rent, paying everything else because she didn't have as many employees on staff. I had 34 employees the entire time. So the 75-25 was perfect for us, but for another business that may have been closed, that's going to be hugely beneficial to them because they're going to be able to grab those that 40% and pay more to keep the actual standing business open. The extension to December 31st to rehire the FTEs is going to be important because now you're going to be able the full-time equivalents. The hardest part right now is we have this extra $600 that people are making on unemployment, and getting people back is the hardest part. People are coming back to work angry because they're making less money, but they have to come back to their job or they could lose their job. So that expiring is going to help, but it gives us until December or till January to get that. And then, the other one was the good faith of rehiring. That was going to be a massive thing. If I'm trying to rehire, but I can't rehire, that if I can show, look, I've done all these interviews, I just can't get anybody in. That is going to be a godsend for some of these businesses that can't rehire, but they've been trying very hard to. So those were just some examples I thought were fantastic. Yeah.
Time has expired.
Thank you very much. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Gentleman yields back, and now we recognize the gentle lady from California, Ms. Chu.
Thank you. Mr. Sosa, since the start of the COVID crisis, it's been a top priority of mine to ensure that SBA loans and resources are provided in non-English languages, and I'm thankful for all the work the committee's done to make that happen. The CARES Act provided $25 million for the SBA to develop these resources, and the agency has now posted several guides and translations in 17 languages, including Asian languages. But it's key that the SBA also provides proactive outreach to small business owners with limited English proficiency and supports the lenders that are responsible for processing their PPP applications. So I'm interested in your perspective as a lender. Could you explain what processes you have to serve business owners who need service in non-English languages? And can you discuss what guidance, if any, that SBA has provided to help you serve these businesses?
Unfortunately, we have not received much guidance on how on the multiple languages available in documentation. In our footprint, the largest language is Spanish. We are very fortunate within our organization that we have several people that are Spanish speakers, and we're able to deploy their talents to be able to address the needs of the particular borrowers that needed that assistance.
Now, you said in your testimony that the PPP forgiveness application is so complex that small businesses would need to hire professionals to help them understand it. Do you believe the SBA has done enough to help limited English proficient business owners navigate these forgiveness applications?
Well, you're exactly correct. My view on the former 11-page application is that it's extremely daunting. Now, the forgiveness application that came out this morning is a step in the right direction. I've had only an opportunity to review it cursory, so I can't speak to it in detail. but they are, but like anything else, the devil's in the detail. And there's a couple of items in there that are still requiring all the same documentation as before. So my recommendation to this committee and to the Congress is that an auto forgiveness legislation is passed to direct the agencies to set up that $150,000 automatic forgiveness of loans.
Yeah, thank you. Ms. Harrington, SBA was directed by Congress to prioritize underserved businesses, including those owned by minorities, women, and veterans in their administration of the PPP. However, when I chaired a forum last month with the SBA Inspector General, he told me that SBA had not provided any formal guidance to lenders, but had merely emailed a few community banks and encouraged them to serve these businesses. Can you explain what specific type of guidance SBA must and should provide lenders to ensure that they can adequately prioritize underserved businesses?
They should, you're absolutely right. And we have yet to see any of that guidance. They should provide guidance about who they should be working with, and just guidance about how important this is. I think the fact that this was included in the CARES Act and was a stated express intent of Congress that these businesses and communities be served is important. And the fact that SBA did not reach out to lenders with specific information about how to reach these communities, different partners they could work with. Also the technical assistance that was provided in the act was provided through universities and not necessarily through community-based organizations. The guidance could have also included information about working with other community partners beyond the community-based organizations like CDFIs and MDIs who do a good job of serving these communities. There is so much that the SBA could have done to ensure that these communities were prioritized that they did not do. And some of it is like very simple things, and they just didn't take the steps to do so, in addition to not actually collecting the data to know what was happening with the lending itself.
Thank you. I yield back.
The gentle lady yields back, and now we recognize the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Hearn, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you, Ranking Member Shabbat. Appreciate you having this hearing today. It's great to see we have a hearing, and before we can have the hearing, that the simplified form comes out. How about that for congressional work? You all ought to be happy about that. Don't we wish everything else could happen in that kind of speed? I really sympathize with each of you, and being a small business owner for 35 years, and the majority of that in the restaurant industry. And it's been very, very difficult for everyone, but specifically those in the restaurant and hotel industry. But I'm also very thankful that we're able to find a way to get money to businesses very quickly by using our financial institutions out there, and thankful for what's all been done with the PPP loans and the idle loans to help as many businesses stay in business as possible. We know that there will be many that will file for bankruptcy, and it's tragic that COVID-19 pandemic has caused this to happen. The PPP loans in my state have been around, in the state of Oklahoma, 61,000 loans and roughly $5 billion in loans to help small businesses. And I'm greatly appreciative of that money to help the folks stay in business. You know, it's as we all know, and we sometimes forget, that we put about 15 to 20 years worth of work that SBA normally does and shoved it into about a 12-week period. And that's no easy task for any industry or any business or lending institution, much less a government institution. So I want to be recognizing of the hard work of the staff. And I know this is not to be critical of the staff, more of the institution. But I know the staff has had to work long hours to make sure that businesses were saved. The first question I have is really, because there's been minimal actual guidance, and instead the SBA has had a series of released frequently asked questions that have been kind of leaked out or just trickled out, if you will. The administrator to guide American business owners and employees through the hectic and confusing time. And further adding confusion are the multiple releases of the interim and final rules that sometimes have contradicted themselves. Dr. Coleman, Ms. Kelly, each of you talked about this confusion in your testimony, and I was wondering if you could, as people that look at small business, I know none of us want to spend any time in the past, certainly not the last 4 months. But as we go forward, what are some of the solutions that both of you think the SBA could implement moving forward to perfect the PPP program? There's still roughly $90 billion out there, so that we could help with the money that we currently have authorized and appropriated, that we can currently help the small businesses that are out there. Ms. Kelly, you want to go first?
Absolutely. The recent passage of the PPP was great. I applied to increase my loan, and unfortunately, I was notified by the bank that they basically changed the field goal. So I couldn't, they had already submitted their 1502, and I was approved for a certain amount of money, but then I was denied. I would like that to be revisited. Many Mainers and small businesses are debt averse, and none of us thought that this was going to last more than 8 weeks. And here we are.
Yeah. Hey, Dr. Coleman, could you give us your thoughts?
You need to unmute, sir.
Somebody else keeps unmuting me. The 60% that's out there right now, as far as what to be used for payroll, I think one thing that's scaring some people is that cliff? Is that a cliff that is, if I don't hit that 60%, am I going to still get my forgiveness? So maybe if the Small Business Committee and the SBA can come out and say, look, if you use 55%, we will forgive 35% of your other one. So there's a little concern as far as that goes, because everybody is saying the same thing. My accountant actually said something a little bit different right online. So, making that a concrete, look, here's where you're at. If you hit one of these markers, you change that other marker down. That would be one of the big ones. And the other big concern I have is the taxation of the loan. I don't know if this is something to discuss here, but if we have to save 25 to 35% of the loan to repay on the taxes because it's not currently deductible on our taxes, now we're concerned that, okay, we've got a loan for $200,000. Do I need to keep $50,000 to $65,000 back to be able to pay that tax back? Thank you very much.
We recognize the gentle lady from, where is it? From Kansas, Ms. Davis, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Velasquez. And also would like to thank Ranking Member Chabot for holding this hearing today. Unfortunately, there have been many challenges for small businesses who've tried to access the Paycheck Protection Program and the EIDL programs. And in more recent conversations with small business owners, one of their main concerns is complexity around the loan forgiveness. And I was, of course, glad to see, I know others are too, that today the SBA revised its forgiveness application and introduced a streamlined application for smaller borrowers. However, many challenges and questions about the process remain, and I'm glad we have both small business owners and lenders on the panel today. So I'd like to hear from both perspectives. Do you believe that the rolling and piecemeal nature of the PPP guidance from the SBA has discouraged or disincentivized small businesses from entering the program?
I can go first.
Please.
Yeah, that was the biggest thing I heard from my colleagues, the people that didn't get it, was this is something where I don't know the rules, and therefore I don't want to take on that debt, because it wasn't a slam dunk, this is what's going to happen. I would prefer not to take on any additional debt. And because debt is scary to small business, we don't want debt. We have our mortgages, we have our equipment loans already. So taking on additional debt without that concrete, hey, you do this, it's forgiven. That was the biggest concern, I would say.
I think it's definitely a major issue in terms of the rollout of the program and the confusion, particularly for the really small businesses and the businesses owned by people of color. There were so many hurdles throughout and changes to the process, the time it took to even figure out what forgiveness would look like, right? And you're right, so many business owners are afraid that this will not end up being a grant. It will be a debt that they have to pay back over just 2 years. We don't even know what next year will look like yet because we're in the midst of a pandemic. And so the idea that they're going to have debt that they have to pay back in the next 2 years is extremely scary for many of them. And also just other things in the program that don't get talked about as much. The fact that for the first week, sole proprietors and self-employed couldn't even apply for the funding. So all of these things indicate to people, and that's the vast majority of business owners of color who are self-employed, that this program is not for them and that it will not work for them in the long run.
Oh, Ms. Kelly.
Yes,
Go ahead.
I would like to say that since the PPP rules have changed and the pandemic actually lasted longer than we expected, and all of this is compacted in a seasonal area where we depend on 36 million tourists a year, and we only have 1.5 million residents in our state. We need the PPP support, and we need change, and we also need to know what the rules are, because you're afraid if you do, you're afraid if you don't.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the recognition of our small businesses and sole proprietors, and particularly the small business owners who are from marginalized communities needing that certainty around the rules and the rollout. I know a lot of folks here in Kansas who are small business owners were really concerned about what felt like a very tumultuous and uncertain time with the rollout of these programs, even though they recognize that they really did need the relief. So I appreciate the work you all are doing. And with that, I will yield the balance of my time. Thank you, Chairwoman.
The gentle lady yields back, and now we recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Burchett. I guess that he just logged off. So we recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop.
You just called me. I'm not ready to go. Secret. I'm in route, Madam Chairman. If you can't skip me, then I'll have to
but
pass.
I see Mr. Burchett, so the gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Chair Lady. Sorry about that. I've been all over the Zoom today trying to figure this out. Can you hear me? Okay, I can't hear you, but I just read your lips. I think you said yes, we can, so I'll go with that. Well, thank y'all so much. I guess my question was really, I wanted to tell Ms. Kelly that my nephew is a Culinary Institute of America graduate. So, but he was not alumni of the year as you were. So, but I assume one day he will aspire to that. I've heard from our small business lenders or small business folks and lenders in the district that we need simplification, a loan forgiveness process for the small lenders. And I was proud to join with our friend Representative Andy Barr in writing a letter to the Treasury and the SBA advocating a streamlined forgiveness process for borrowers under $350,000 threshold. And also on a personal note, I hope everybody remembers Andy Barr and his two lovely little girls in their prayers. Andy lost his wife last night, and the little girls lost their mama. And I know that's just a tragedy. And so if we can remember him in our prayers. But today, of course, the SBA also announced a new easy forgiveness application that I look forward to reviewing. But Mr. Sosa, in your opinion, are there any roadblocks hindering a small business from obtaining a full loan forgiveness?
I'm sorry, I was having a little bit of difficulty unmuting there for a minute.
It's all right, Brenda.
It's Prior to the issuance of this morning's 3508 EC form, which I too have not had an opportunity to review in depth, just a mere fact, like the good doctor stated earlier, that it was 11 pages long, scared most people. And now, while the appearance appears that we're in the step of the right direction, it also appears that what they've done on the easy form is simply separated the instructions from the actual form. So it looks a lot simpler, but it still has some certifications and all the traditional documentation that was asked for in the first go round to be included with that easy form. That's highly disenfranchising or highly difficult for small business to obtain. I still think that the best situation is to address, very much like what Ms. Kelly has said, and very much like what Doctor has said, that we need a sure forgiveness that says you had a loan of 150,000 or less, you're forgiven. And the Congress has that ability to do that.
All right. Also, Mr. Sosa, is there any way you could provide the committee an overview of how credit elsewhere has changed from the beginning of the PPP to today?
Yes, sir. At the beginning, the statute eliminated credit elsewhere.
Okay.
Just plain and simple did that. And now they need to certify that they need that application and those funds. And nobody's defined what need is.
All right. Thank you. Chair Lady, I yield back the rest of my time. It's always a pleasure seeing you.
Thank you. The gentleman is back. And now we recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Ms. Harrington, I want to follow up on something you said, because it sounds like to me, and not going to put words in your mouth, it sounds like we could lose a lot of Black businesses, specifically, obviously there's the pandemic, and then there's the unrest, and then there's the PPP. So tell me in a very specific way, what percentage of Black businesses you think we lost?
I think we are definitely at risk of that. I think it is hard to tell, but the numbers we do know are very telling, and the stories that we are hearing are very telling. When we hear numbers like 41% of active Black business owners are, the number of active Black business owners have dropped by 41%. When we look at the unemployment numbers that are still so high and so much higher even in Black communities and communities of color, right? We know there are businesses that were already struggling before we even came to the pandemic. There were so many businesses that entered the pandemic with less than 3 weeks or so of reserves that could sustain them. And now we don't know how long this is going to last. There's so many other issues in this country. And so we're watching as so many businesses that are inactive now, many of them probably won't reopen. And there's some that are still waiting for answers on PPP, who may close and never reopen. And as this pandemic extends, that number will only increase. And that's why we have to think about not just how we fix the PPP, but how we fix small business credit and support in general, and how we make sure it works for the businesses in every community, not just.
So then take the next step and tell me what specifically you think the kinds of things that should happen.
Absolutely. So with regard to the PPP, we advocate for creating a minimum origination fee, for creating that streamlined automatic forgiveness for loans under 100K, which would save countless hours, 71 million hours of labor, we estimate, on behalf of business owners who would have to provide all of that documentation and go through all of those pieces of labor with the lenders as well. Data collection and transparency, so important. A reserve for CDFIs and MDIs who do the best job of serving businesses in these communities. Requiring guidance on underserved markets and making sure that you are targeting the funds to those small businesses and the businesses in the low to moderate income census tracts. And also thinking beyond just loan programs, grant programs that are provided directly through the federal government, so we can remove the intermediary financial institutions. we recognize that there is already issues with accessing a program through a mainstream lender when we see the lack of access to credit that has plagued these communities for decades. So if we know that there is already a barrier to accessing a program through that intermediary, let's remove it. Let's provide
Are you talking
directly
about,
to the
like, for
government.
example, are you talking about, like, for example, the EIDL program in terms of that? You talking
The
about that?
EIDL program absolutely is one example. There have been grant programs through FEMA. You can do grant programs directly through the IRS and Treasury. There are a number of ways to do that that we should think about beyond just having the financial institution as intermediary. That already places a barrier for many of the businesses owned by people of color.
I thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
The gentleman yields back, and now we recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And Ranking Member Shabbat and witnesses, thank you for joining us today for an important conversation on this Paycheck Protection Program. I'm in the committee room, as I have been the previous meeting, and I was taken to task by the chairwoman for making people disinfected, but I do it for a very important reason, which is to emphasize that we can be in Washington. There are two other people in this room, three other people. They are many, many feet away from me. But if we were closer, we could be wearing masks. We could do our business in Washington, and I think it would make the meeting more effective and your testimony more effective. But thank you very much for being with us. Fortunately, the hearing comes at a fitting moment as Democratic members of the Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Crisis have proceeded with another witch hunt, at this time aimed at Secretary Mnuchin, Administrator Carranza, and PPP lenders. When Congress overwhelmingly passed the Paycheck Protection Program, we did that in a bipartisan fashion. Last week, the director of the Congressional Budget Office, Philip Swagel, praised the Treasury Department and Small Business Administration for moving quickly and efficiently, while also stating the stimulus to COVID-19 went out faster than the stimulus during the 2008 financial crisis. Unfortunately, my Democratic colleagues who helped design the Paycheck Protection Program failed to recognize the Trump administration's swift actions to save our economy. There's more work to be done, but Democrats would rather investigate, critique, and undermine the good work performed by the Trump administration than provide adequate recovery to Americans. Make no mistake, Democrats' antics and sham investigations are not limited to the Trump administration. They also want to investigate PPP lenders who served as the conduit for providing small business relief. Lenders didn't ask for that role, but they delivered. Prior to PPP going live in March, I heard from lenders throughout North Carolina about obstacles it would take to participate in the program. They were nervous and skeptical, but they stepped up to the plate to help small businesses in their community. Mr. Sosa, in your testimony, you worried about the way the federal government is treating lenders right now, that it might lead to less lending partners in the future. In fact, you used the term threat. And I wonder, would you agree that the same logic applies to Congress as it begins investigating lenders for their role in the PPP?
The difficulty that I face is that I'm not a politician, so I don't really have an axe to grind either way. What I look at is that when we put out a program under the regular SBA program, we know what the rules are. We know how to put a loan on the books. We know how to take it through the process. We know how to collect that loan. That is the process that assures that oversight is fair. That is a process that tries to assure that lending is fair to all communities. So if we could get something like that, I think you have much more participation from all the lenders.
I appreciate that, Mr. Sosa. And let me just ask this, if Amarillo National Bank were asked to turn over all communications with Treasury and SBA related to administering PPP, would it serve as a disincentive to your bank as well as other lenders from doing business with the federal government in this situation?
Let me ask you a question for clarification, please. You want to know, you're asking us if we could give you all the documentation that SBA and Treasury use to, or the agencies use to direct the program?
Well, no, your correspondence, your bank's correspondence, if you had to, like face a retrospective request to turn over all correspondence you had, so that, someone's going to go through it with a fine tooth comb, wouldn't that deter you from wanting to cooperate in a program like this?
We've been participating in SBA lending for at least 15 years.
I'm glad you are.
Our books are open, and it would be a simple task of printing all the FAQs and all the 18, 19 IFRs.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Socia. Ms. Kelly, you mentioned the federal supplemental unemployment benefits have caused you some difficulty getting your employees back. And I think you mentioned it was good that it was ending in July. If that were extended to December 31st, would that be harmful to you?
Excuse me, sorry, but time has expired.
Thank you, Madam
Now
Chairman.
we recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Schneider.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and I want to thank you for holding this important hearing today. I also want to take a moment to thank you, the committee, and in particular the committee staff, for really being at the forefront, for standing up the remote capabilities of our committee, allowing us to have numerous briefings and hearings like this to do the business of the American people, to do what we have to do to help America's small businesses in this very difficult time. The work of you and the ranking member Chabot has been extraordinary, as has the members of this committee. So I just want to thank everyone for that. PPP for the country and in my district in particular has been a lifeline for workers and businesses. But we've heard in this committee, and we've heard from businesses, I hear about it almost on a daily basis, that they've had to wrangle not just the challenges of the COVID pandemic, but the lack of clarity from the SBA and Treasury on the program, the PPP program. My office has worked directly with our local SBA representatives in my community small business development center to help businesses, providing them with up-to-date guidance on the SBA programs. I commend the incredible hard work of the SBA's local staff, whom my team has found to be an incredibly valuable resource in a group of dedicated employees. But the guidance coming from SBA and Treasury has been anything but clear. The SBA and Treasury have released 17 interim final rules on these programs and 47 or maybe 48 FAQs. The application for the loan forgiveness process was 11 pages and released only a week before applicants became eligible. This morning, the SBA did release a revamped shortened application for the EZ process, but I'm already hearing from lenders who say that neither of these actually simplify the process at all. I've already begun to hear from local banks in my districts starting to receive loan forgiveness applications, and my staff has fielded innumerable questions about the complicated loan forgiveness process. So I want to focus on those two issues, simplification and clarity. First, on simplification, as the committee knows, oftentimes the accounting department at a small business is but one individual. When I had my own business with 10 employees, I was doing the accounting myself. There's a whole list of other tasks that these people have to do. It's critical that the loan forgiveness process, particularly for the smallest loans, be simple enough for the business owners to complete without having to rely on outside assistance, as our witnesses have testified. Looking to our two business owners on the panel, Ms. Kelly and Dr. Coleman, can you provide some context, not just how much funding you received, which you laid out, but the amount of energy and time that was invested to get the loan, and then as you're looking to go through the forgiveness process? Ms. Kelly, maybe we'll start with you.
Absolutely. I did spend quite a bit of time getting all of my ducks in a row to submit my application originally. I'm fortunate that I have a very good relationship with a local bank who was helpful, but it was very difficult because unfortunately they made the necessary rule change with the ability to go back and borrow the original and full allowance as the financial need has changed as we have progressed with this COVID-19, and it's made it very difficult. As far as the forgiveness is gone, I was not able to have, with the current restrictions on indoor capacity of the restaurant and lost revenue in the beginning of the season, I could not. It was very challenging for me to have the FTE count, and so my forgiveness seems impossible.
Mr. Schneider, you need to unmute.
As far as my experience with it, I thought the loan process went very well. I pride myself on being somebody that is ahead of the curve. Like I said, I was in my testimony. I was really seeking out all the information that I could seek out and get everything together as soon as I could. And then immediately, I knew there was going to be a frenzy, so I got my loan application in. The first thing I found the loan application, even as a business owner, pretty straightforward. I did need to require some help from my accountant to get the proper 941s and all those documents together. As far as the forgiveness, I'm hoping I'm on track for everything. We are actually up in the 80s as far as our payroll percentage wise. So we have hopefully a good chance of getting forgiveness. You know, we are holding back about 5% of our loan just in possible calamity down the road. If anything happens, when somebody gets sick or anything else, and my business suffers, we're saving some back, and I'm actually hoping to return that 5%. That would be the best case scenario. So that'd be great.
Thank you. My time's expired, but I want to thank Ms. Harrington and Mr. Sosa. And Mr. Sosa, I appreciate your testimony and especially the story of the American dream in 50 years with your wife. I wish you all the best.
The gentleman's time has expired. Now we recognize the gentle lady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Houlihan.
Hi, Madam Chair, and I want to echo Mr. Schneider's appreciation to you and to the staff for allowing this to be possible and making it look so easy. I also want to thank the folks who are testifying in front of us. I can actually palpably feel the tension and the pain, even remotely, in your testimony, because I know how exasperating it is. As a former business owner and operator myself and a former entrepreneur, I can feel the pain, and I hope that we can be at least helpful a little bit more in alleviating that. My questions have to do with the concept of forgiveness, automatic forgiveness, and I understand from Mr. Sosa, as well as from Ms. Kelly, as well as from a lot of the other folks who testified, that 150,000, 100 or so thousand seems to be the line that people are drawing. And I understand that represents about 80% of the total loans and about 20 or so percent of the amount. But getting back to some of the testimony about transparency and the importance of data that has to do with where loans are going, I also think it's really, really important that we have transparency to understand where they were spent, because I believe that this won't be the first or last time that we have to implement something like the Paycheck Protection Program. I want it to be more expedient the next time that we do it and more efficacious the next time we do it. And so if we just blanket forgive anybody under $150,000, $100,000, then we will have lost all the granularity of that data of where it went and how it was spent. And so if you guys wouldn't mind, I guess maybe if I could start with Mr. Sosa, what kind of effort could we undertake that would allow us to be able to capture some of that important data, but not take the hours and hours of time away from both the business people as well as the lenders to be able to allow us to have that information?
That is a challenge, Congresswoman. When you look at this and you, even if we just take the case of 50,000 or less, that's 3 million loans. That is a significant challenge for anyone to go through and do a review. 150,000 does, as you mentioned, does take care of the majority of the applicants out there. But there's nothing wrong with getting a simple certification from the folks that, yes, we spent the money, even if you ask for an estimation. But
I guess that's what I'm asking is, couldn't we simply have like literally a chart that says I spent 20% on overhead, I spent 80% on salary, certified by this organization? Is that not something that's practical?
That would be very simple and very appropriate. We just need to be sure that the agencies are directed as such, so to avoid the fact that they might continue on the road that they have, even on this EC program, EC application. It needs to be simpler than that. Part of the concern is that if the small business person has this loan outstanding and a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, somebody changes their mind and finds that they weren't eligible at that point, and
I
they go
understand.
back. That's a scary thought for a lot of small businesses.
I understand. I understand. And I'm sure you can appreciate it. And I'd love to hear from Ms. Harrington too, you know, how important it is to track that data. Is there anything that we can implement by legislate, meaning that we can be helpful to make sure that we actually know where this money was spent? Just as it is important knowing who got it, we're also trying to make sure we're good stewards to the taxpayers of where it got spent.
Absolutely. I think a simple certification form, going to what Mr. Sosa was describing, we absolutely support. Certifying that they spent the money on eligible expenses, and a good faith certification, and a space to leave there to put their demographic data. One page form, very simple, easy to fill out. Also, making sure that SBA and the lenders themselves are directed that they can rely on this good faith certification for these small dollar loans. I think it can be as simple as that, but it is something that Congress will have to do because the documentation requirements under the CARES Act are so extensive. So I think there has to be direction from you to borrowers, to SBA, to lenders that enables them to really take part in that. And this will absolutely benefit the smallest businesses, but also give you the transparency that you need to know where these funds are going.
Thank you. And I know my time has expired, and I was wondering if the chair would allow me one more question, because I think I'm the last person asking questions.
Yes, ma'am.
That would be terrific. Thank you. My question is to Ms. Kelly and to Mr. Coleman. I know right now you are working to make sure that you can get your loans forgiven in an ideal scenario. What kind of will be the biggest challenge for you to be able to do that? Do you feel, is it a matter of data, or making sure you can track things? And how have you been keeping track of all of the changes with SBA and the PPP program?
I would like to say that similar to Dr. Rich, we initially set up a separate bank account and really tracked everything we spent with that loan. The problem with it was because because of the lack of business, because we're on a state mandate shutdown, we couldn't bring back the proper the account of FTE. So I felt like I knew I was going to not be forgiven for a percentage of the loan. Either way, I did it. It was helpful for a time period, but in the long run, it's not really that helpful if they can't. But after we did the recalculations, being able to go back and take a second bite of the apple was denied because of the filing of the 1502. So that became a big issue for me here with my business.
Thank you.
As far as my concerns, most of my information actually came through from my accountant. He will send out a nice little newsletter once the was changed last week. We got a nice little newsletter saying, hey, these are the changes. So that would be one place I would have the small business committee really reach out to as the accountants and say, hey, here's your, please send this information out to your clientele. It was a simple email that they put together, but it gave me a massive amount of information and definitely put my mind at ease as far as where to go from here. As concerns.
Okay, the gentle lady.
I'm sorry, my time has expired. I yield back and thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me an extra question.
Sure. Thank you. And thank you again to all the witnesses today for their testimony and for offering their views on the PPP. By sharing your experiences, we will be able to conduct more effective oversight and continue to optimize the PPP program. Though I am pleased the program appears to be saving small business jobs as we intended, your testimonies have confirmed that there are still some issues that need to be addressed. I assure you we will continue to work to make the program as accessible for borrowers and lenders as it can be. I ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statement and supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered, and if there's no further business before the committee, we are adjourned.